Hi, my name is Emily Cole, and I'm 32. The night my family finally turned on me didn't come at a wedding or a funeral. It came at home. At my mother's kitchen table, a spoiled plate waited. When I scraped it into the trash, Mom's scream cracked. "You dare waste food in this house?" she shouted, shaking. Mark and his wife Ashley walked in at that moment. All they saw was me at the bin, not rot. "You ungrateful brat," they snapped. "You're breaking Mom's heart." They had no idea what I'd been swallowing all these years. I grew up in a Texas suburb where thrift ruled. Mom preached it nightly, tapping plates like a metronome. "Every grain is a blessing," she said, sliding leftovers over. Leftovers weren't pie. They were milk souring, bread spotting, meat graying. Mark and Jenny got first cuts, crisp apples, warm rolls, steam. Mine were too good to waste, scraps nobody else would touch. When I hesitated, Mom's voice sharpened, slicing through my appetite. "Don't act spoiled, Emily. Be grateful you even have dinner." Dad rarely looked up, murmuring, "It's fine. Eat. Nothing wrong." Mark laughed when I gagged, counting my flinches like points. Jenny whispered, "Baby stomach," drawing smirks like tally marks. I learned early that hunger wasn't the lesson, obedience was. By middle school, I dreaded the fridge light and hush. Refusing meant lectures about starving children and my selfish attitude. So I swallowed faster, chasing bites with water until numb. Meals weren't for nourishing me. They kept me small. At school, I saved lunch money for yogurt and bars. Gas stations felt safer than home. Nothing called me ungrateful. Church potlucks brought relief. Paper plates carried quiet mercy. Still, Sunday nights reset the house like a script. Mark bragged about goals, Jenny about honor roll, applause arriving. My plate cooled while they talked, steam dying with protest. I asked for fresh food. Mom sighed like I blasphemed. "Money doesn't grow on trees. Stop wasting perfectly good leftovers." I wondered why good tasted metallic, why bread fuzzed overnight. Dad called it thrift. My stomach called it warning signs. I ate late at friends' houses, pretending I'd eaten earlier. Their moms noticed, wrapping leftovers, the kind that smelled right. I hid containers in my backpack, shame heavy as bricks. Back home, the fridge light turned into an interrogation lamp. "We all make sacrifices," Mom said, scooping cold casserole. But sacrifices only traveled one direction, always landing here. The message hardened. I was the plate for everyone's scraps. Love didn't taste like this. Control did. Salted humiliation. I learned to chew quietly, make my reactions invisible. It felt easier than fighting every single night. But every bite carved grooves later choices slid into. Every apology tasted like fear. Every plate like staying small. I should have known they weren't saving food. They were saving face. I left for college with 2 bags and a promise. I would never eat shame again if I could help it. A dorm fridge became my first declaration of autonomy. Milk that didn't curl, bread without fuzz, clean chicken. I taught myself to cook. Small pans, careful heat, honest flavors. Tuition didn't wait, so I stacked 2 part-time jobs. Front desk evenings, library weekends, rent paid to the dollar. I chopped vegetables like I was editing my history. No more backpack containers, no more gas station dinners, ever. Holidays dragged me back to the kitchen I forgot. Mom beamed. "Emily doesn't mind the leftovers," like a rule. Mark smirked. Jenny rolled her eyes. Dad blessed the food. The plate in front of me told a quiet story. I learned tricks. Bread first, portion small, smile, exit early. Peace at that table cost appetite, dignity, and sleep. After graduation, I rented a bright, clean apartment alone. IT hired me. Promotions followed one careful quarter at a time. I shipped releases, fixed fires, earned trust without raising volume. Outside, I was reliable. Inside, I negotiated with ghosts. Refusing food at home risked another sermon on gratitude. Eating meant nausea and the private shame returning again. Money wasn't the issue. I could have catered holidays. Something still nodded appetite to old obligations and scripts. I trained, meal prepped, learned food safety like doctrine. Yet the childhood switch flipped whenever Mom lifted lids. Her smile said, "Grateful." Her portions said, "Know your place." Maybe thrift hardened into habit, I told myself. Maybe fear calcified into routine while nobody noticed. That story helped me endure without naming the harm. But denial cracks under the weight of evidence. And evidence was exactly what I was about to find. Mom asked me to set up her online bill pay. I typed her passwords, the room humming with appliances. Utilities, pharmacy, groceries. Receipts stacked neatly by week. Imported fruit, prime cuts, Friday deliveries already scheduled. The same Fridays I was told leftovers were all we had. My throat tightened. The kitchen clock ticked louder suddenly. I closed the laptop, swallowed anger, and said nothing. The next visit already hung heavy over my shoulders. I wasn't done pretending yet, but I was done not knowing. The truth had a paper trail, and it led to dinner. I went back the next weekend with my jaw set. Not for a fight, just for clarity and light. Mom hummed at the sink. The house smelled like lemons. "Bill pay works," she said, drying a spotless glass. I opened the fridge and saw the truth arranged. Top shelf, labeled containers, dates printed, portions sealed bright. Mark and Jenny, in thick marker pointing toward fresh. Below, foil pans, no dates, gray softening at edges. A sticky note above them read, "Emily, don't waste, still fine." Receipts in my bag matched the brands lined inside. This wasn't scarcity. It was choreography, practiced and precise. A stage where I swallowed on cue, thrift earned applause. My stomach tightened, not from hunger but from naming it. I lifted a foil corner. The smell turned the room. Mom turned too, voice honeyed. "Put that back. Dinner later." "Dinner for who?" I asked, steady, almost gentle. "For us," she said. "You know you don't mind leftovers." I set the foil down like evidence on a table. "Imported berries, prime cuts, Friday deliveries," I said, quiet. Her eyes flicked to my bag as the paper rustled. "You went through my things," she said, sweetness turning brittle. "I set up your bill pay," I said. "I saw." Mark texted, "We're on our way," like a cue line. Silence had made me complicit. My okays trained the room. I felt the script click into place around us. I wasn't a child without options anymore. Not now. I financed my groceries and rent without anyone's help, yet still ate rules written by someone else's preference. Not fear, not thrift. Preference dressed as righteousness at home. From the back I pulled a container. Clabbered milk. Mom reached. I kept it out of reach, firmly. "Emily," she warned, "don't make drama from nothing." "It isn't nothing," I said. "It never was." My hands trembled. My voice finally steadied and held. I placed the container beside the receipts and breathed. The clock clicked toward dinner. Precise, not explosive, a demonstration. They arrived. The house warmed for guests. Easy laughter. Mom baked crust onto casserole, hiding sour beneath. Home smelled like performance. I was done performing. Dad stayed a shadow in the hallway, just like always. I didn't want revenge. I wanted truth tasted now. So I planned something simple, impossible to spin away. One bite would say what years of pleading couldn't. If they called me ungrateful, they'd borrow my plate. Not punishment, proof. Witnessed by everyone present tonight. That night, I decided everyone would taste the truth. The table was dressed for company, napkins folded like birds. Mom slid a casserole before me, edges brown to hide sour. "Emily doesn't mind leftovers," she chirped, smoothing her apron. Mark poured wine. Ashley checked her phone, smiling politely. I lifted the serving spoon, not my fork at all. A scoop landed on Mark's plate, heavy and wrong. Another slid onto Ashley's, steam carrying a sweet rot. "Go ahead," I said. "Taste what's always been fine for me." Mark chuckled, waiting for me to laugh with him. "Don't be dramatic," he said, eyes darting to Mom. Ashley nudged the plate away like it might stain. "Just one bite," I said. "Prove I'm ungrateful. Prove it." Silence spread, thin and sticky across the tablecloth. They lifted forks because pride hates public challenge. The instant it touched their tongues, their faces folded. Ashley spat into her napkin. Mark gagged hard, retreating. The room froze on that scrape. Metal legs, hardwood. Shame. I leaned forward, voice steady, finally matching my spine. "With you, it's disgusting," I said. "With me, it's duty. That taste is my childhood. That gag is my proof." Mom reached for the dish. My hand reached faster. From my bag, I laid receipts in a clean stack. Supplier invoices. Fresh label stickers. Same-day delivery confirmations. All the weeks you claimed fresh wasn't in the budget. Color drained from her face, then anger tried repainting. "You went through my things," she said. Sweetness turned brittle glass. "I set up your bill pay," I answered. The truth itemized. "This isn't thrift," I added. "It's choreography. I'm the prop." Mark slammed the table, red climbing his neck like ivy. "Apologize to Mom," he snapped. "You humiliated her here." "She humiliated me for decades," I said, not blinking. "And you cheered when she called it gratitude and discipline." Ashley whispered, "It did taste off," then shrank under stares. Mom hissed, "You could have refused." I met her eyes. "I did refuse," I said. You called refusal ungrateful, cruel. You weaponized waste and named it love to win. I slid the casserole toward the bin and paused, deliberate. I'm done performing grateful, I said. Done eating what poisons. The dish tipped, fell, and shattered. A sharp, honest sound. Steam rose and the room finally smelled like honesty. Dad hovered in the doorway. Silence pressed across his lips. I looked once, then let the glance pass by. Here's what happens next, I said, breathing steady. I don't eat here anymore. I won't apologize for leaving. If you call that ungrateful, you can keep the word. If you call it cruel, taste the plate before speaking. I won't swallow your story so you feel righteous. I won't be the bin where you dump what you won't face. I picked up my bag. The room felt oddly larger. Mark muttered about family. Ashley studied the ruined floor. Mom reached for a broom that couldn't sweep what mattered. No one moved to block the door this time. Walking away never tasted so bitter, or so clean. But freedom has a second course, and I'll serve it. I packed 2 bags and closed the door without ceremony. A small apartment waited. Quiet walls, bright windows, clean kitchen. I stocked the fridge with fresh fruit and honest protein. The first meal tasted simple, and it tasted like mine. I built rituals that stitched safety back together daily. Morning runs along the river, breath steady, legs remembering strength. Evening chopping sessions, music low, knife rhythmic, vegetables bright. My body relearned the difference between fuel and fear. Therapy translated instinct into language I could trust. Dr. Sanders said, it wasn't thrift, it was control. We named the pattern and practiced exits I could live. Not revenge, boundaries, not punishment, distance, not silence, selective access. Mom left voicemails about gratitude. I archived them unheard. Mark texted I embarrassed the family. I didn't reply. I wasn't starving anyone. I was feeding myself truth. Respect is a meal you serve yourself first, then share. I hosted Sunday dinners for people who keep promises. Friends brought recipes and stories. We blessed the table differently. No one earned food by obedience. No one swallowed to belong. Laughter rose without apology. Leftovers carried kindness, not contempt. Some relatives reached with honesty, not excuses or revisions. I forgave what I could and released what I couldn't. Compassion doesn't require proximity. Love doesn't excuse repeated harm. I miss the idea of family, not the performance. I keep one photo from childhood on the fridge door. Not to ache, but to honor the girl who endured. She read kitchens like weather and still survived storms. I cook for her now. Plate warm, portions fair, flavors bright. If your hunger was used to teach obedience, listen up. You're not dramatic for wanting food that doesn't scare you. You're not ungrateful for refusing what poisons body or spirit. You're allowed to leave the table that keeps you small. If this story resonates, add your hype in the first 7 days. Have you faced something like this? Tell me in the comments. If you've been through it, you're not alone. Not for a minute. Tap hype this week so someone else hears they can refuse. No one has to swallow it to be called family.
I had been counting the days, marking them off in neat boxes on a calendar pinned above my desk. Every paycheck, every overtime hour, every investment I'd carefully nurtured over the years had led to this moment. At 36, I could finally say the words aloud, the house was mine, paid in full. When I told my father, I expected pride, perhaps even a rare smile from the man who had always measured worth in property and permanence. Instead, Roderick Calloway threw his head back and laughed, a low, dismissive sound that rattled in my chest. "Great," he said, still grinning, though his eyes were cold. "Now, pack your bags, your brother's moving in." For a second, I thought I had misheard him. The papers were still warm from the bank's stamp, tucked carefully in my bag. I had imagined this day as a gift for our family, a way of honoring my mother's memory. But across the table, Malcolm was already leaning back in his chair like a king surveying new land. "So I'll take the master," he said lightly, as if my years of sacrifice were nothing more than a transaction completed on his behalf. His tone carried the same ease he had known all his life. Our father's shield had always been his. My mouth went dry. I wanted to argue, to shout the truth into the room until the walls echoed it back. But instead, I sat still, the humiliation washing over me in waves. Every long night, every choice to deny myself so this house could stand it all seemed to collapse in that instant. The pride I had carried into the room was gone, leaving only the sharp edges of betrayal and the first spark of something harder forming inside me. The sting of my father's laughter dragged me back to memories I had tried for years to bury. My entire childhood had been measured against Malcolm's shadow, though he never once carried the same weight I was expected to bear. When I was 12, I came home with straight A's, the result of nights spent studying under the weak light of a desk lamp. My father barely looked up from his newspaper, offering only a curt nod. The very next week, Malcolm brought home a report card dotted with C's, and Roderick clapped him on the back, saying, "At least you passed, son." That was the pattern my best was expected, his mediocrity celebrated. After our mother died, the imbalance deepened. She had been the only one who noticed my efforts, who whispered encouragement when I wanted to give up. Without her, the house grew heavier, and my father's gaze sharpened. I was suddenly the one expected to cook, to clean, to take on the quiet roles my mother once filled, while Malcolm roamed freely, shielded by excuses. In high school, I took part-time jobs at the diner down the road, then as a tutor for neighborhood kids. Every dollar I earned went into savings or to help with bills. Meanwhile, Malcolm spent his afternoons on the basketball courts or sprawled on the couch with friends, the television blaring. If chores were left undone, my father would scold me for not keeping up, never turning to Malcolm, who slipped away with a grin. By the time I left for college, I had learned not to expect fairness. Responsibility clung to me like a second skin, while Malcolm floated through life with the unshakable assurance that someone else would always catch him. Those years had carved the truth into me in my father's eyes. One child could do no wrong, and the other could never do enough. The echo of that lesson was what made his words at the dinner table cut so deep. When I stepped into adulthood, I thought I was stepping into freedom. Instead, I found myself chained to the same house that had weighed on me since childhood. The roof leaked one spring, and while Malcolm shrugged and said it was Dad's problem, I was the one who called contractors, balanced estimates, and quietly put the bill on my credit card. When the water heater broke, I dipped into the savings I had been building for graduate school. Travel brochures I once kept tucked in my desk drawer turned into scrap paper for grocery lists. Each sacrifice was folded neatly into the next until I could barely tell where my own dreams ended and duty began. I told myself it was temporary, that once the house was stable, once my father was secure, I would finally take the trip to Italy I'd planned since college, or apply to that master's program in Boston. But each year blurred into the next, and my responsibilities multiplied. Roderick never thanked me. He spoke as if I were simply doing what was expected, keeping his legacy intact. "It's your duty," he said more than once, his tone flat, final. He never once called it a gift, though every payment I made chipped away at my future. Still, I paid, month after month, year after year. I shouldered the mortgage, convinced that one day he would look at me and see not just a daughter, but a woman who had carried our family on her back. I imagined him proud, even if silently, when the debt was gone. What I did not see then was how that pride I longed for had already been given away to a son who had never lifted a single weight. And that truth began to take shape the night Malcolm leaned back in his chair as if he already owned the walls I had fought to keep standing. The night my father decided to make his announcement, the air in the dining room was thick with expectation. He had called for a family dinner, though we both knew what that usually meant. Another performance in which Malcolm was the star and I was the supporting role. The table was set, the roast steaming, the wine poured, but the warmth was only surface deep. Halfway through the meal, Roderick cleared his throat, setting down his glass with a sharp clink. "Now that the house is finally paid off, it's time to do what's best for the family," he declared. His eyes flicked toward Malcolm with something close to pride. "Your brother will be moving in." I froze, fork suspended in the air. Malcolm grinned, stretching lazily as though the house had already bent itself around his comfort. "I'll take the master bedroom," he said, smirking at me. "It's bigger, and I've always liked that view, The words sliced through me. My years of sacrifice were being erased in a single evening, and no one seemed to notice the devastation written across my face. I forced myself to speak, my voice steady despite the tremor in my chest. This is my home. I paid for it. Every payment, every repair mine. Roderick waved me off, irritation flashing in his eyes. Don't get emotional. Ilara, this isn't about you. It's about family. That word family landed like a stone. To him, family meant Malcolm's comfort and my silence. The humiliation burned, but beneath it, a hard calm began to form. I set down my fork, folded my hands, and let the storm of my father's authority crash uselessly against me. Then I leaned forward, meeting his gaze with a steadiness he didn't expect. "Check the deed again," I whispered. The room fell into a stunned quiet, Malcolm's smirk faltering, my father's face paling as though he had just seen the edge of a truth he never wanted to confront. For a long moment, no one moved. My father's knife hovered over his plate, his knuckles white against the handle. Malcolm let out a nervous laugh, the kind he used whenever he thought someone was bluffing. "What's that supposed to mean?" Malcolm asked, his smirk wavering. I drew in a steady breath. "It means the deed isn't in your name. Father, it isn't in Malcolm's name either. It's in mine, solely. I've been the only one making payments, the only one signing papers. This house belongs to me." Roderick slammed his hand against the table, the silverware rattling. "Don't be ridiculous. I was the one who—" His words faltered, and for the first time I saw hesitation cross his face. He hadn't signed a single document. He had left every detail to me, brushing it off as something women were better at handling. Malcolm shifted uneasily. "Dad, she can't be serious. You said I said what I believed," Roderick snapped, though his voice had lost its usual thunder. His eyes darted toward me, searching for cracks in my composure, but I had none to offer. Calmly, I unfolded the manila envelope I'd carried in my bag since the bank visit. I slid the copy of the deed across the table. My name stared back at them in black ink. Their silence was almost sweet. "You never asked," I said softly. "You assumed, and I let you. Because I thought one day the truth wouldn't matter as much as the family it protected. But I see now it matters more than anything." The weight in the room shifted. For the first time, it wasn't my father dictating terms or Malcolm claiming space he hadn't earned. It was me. Their faces told me they had never truly considered what I had sacrificed, what it had cost to keep this house standing. And in that moment, I knew clarity wasn't enough. The time had come to act, not merely defend. I would not let my years of silence end in another dismissal. The house was mine, and so was the power that came with it. The night after the dinner, I sat at my desk with the deed spread out in front of me. The papers that had once felt like a burden now sharp as a blade. My father's shock replayed in my mind. Malcolm's disbelief echoing like a hollow drum. For years I had been the silent one, the reliable one, the one who never fought back. That part of me was gone. The first call I made was to my lawyer, a patient woman named Ms. Harding who had handled my refinancing paperwork. I explained everything my father's demand, Malcolm's smug assumption, the threat to uproot me from the home I alone had kept afloat. She didn't sound surprised. "We'll make sure your rights are secured," she said firmly. Within days, she arranged for new locks, ensuring that only my keys would open the doors. We updated every relevant document: utilities, insurance, county records, removing any ambiguity about ownership. Then she suggested something that made my chest feel lighter, a notice of occupancy terms. If my father or brother attempted to move in without my consent, we could issue an official eviction notice backed by the court. The idea of having the law at my side felt like fresh air after years of suffocation. While I moved quietly, my father moved loudly. Neighbors stopped me on the sidewalk with polite but curious smiles, saying they had heard Malcolm would soon be taking over the house. One even asked if I was planning to downsize. I simply smiled, my lips pressed thin, and offered no correction. Let them think what they wanted. The truth would arrive soon enough. Back inside the house, I walked through each room, the walls still heavy with years of sacrifice. For the first time, though, I didn't feel trapped. I felt steady. The foundation beneath me wasn't just concrete and wood, it was proof that I had survived, and that I was stronger than they ever imagined. My father believed he had cornered me, that his word was final. What he didn't see was that I had already started moving the pieces, and the board no longer belonged to him. The morning after the paperwork was finalized, I packed a small bag and left before dawn. I wanted space, a breath of distance to let the next step unfold without my presence filling the air. The house was still, the silence almost ceremonial as I closed the door behind me. When the sun rose, Roderick must have expected the familiar sounds of me in the kitchen, the coffee maker bubbling, the rhythm of a home he assumed would always serve him. Instead, the rooms stayed quiet. Malcolm stumbled downstairs, yawning, only to stop cold at the front door. Taped neatly to the glass was the notice, stamped and sealed, declaring in black and white that the property belonged solely to me and that no one had rights to enter, occupy, or alter the residence without my explicit permission. Any attempt to do so would be grounds for legal eviction. I wasn't there to see it, but I could picture the moment Malcolm tugging the paper free, eyes scanning the lines, his confusion growing. Dad! He must have called, voice breaking with uncertainty. Roderick, still in command in his own mind, would have snatched it away, read it once, twice, then slammed it on the table as if sheer force could make the words vanish. Anger would have followed, rage at being undermined, at realizing the authority he wore like a crown was nothing more than borrowed cloth. Neighbors, drawn by the noise, lingered at the edge of their lawns. Whispers traveled quickly down the street how the proud patriarch had been blindsided, how the daughter no one noticed had quietly taken control. By the time I returned later that evening, the air around the house carried a different weight. The illusion of their dominance had cracked, and all that remained was a silence even louder than their shouting. I signed the lease on the condo without hesitation, the pen gliding smoothly as if it, too, understood what this moment meant. The building stood downtown, glass and steel against the skyline, nothing like the old house with its sagging porch and heavy curtains. This place was mine, bought with the savings I had guarded in silence, each dollar a quiet rebellion against years of dismissal. The first night I moved in, I unpacked slowly, placing books on shelves in the order I preferred, choosing bold colors for the walls instead of the muted tones my father had always insisted were respectable. A small reading nook overlooked the city, the hum of life outside a reminder that I was finally a part of something bigger than the endless cycle of sacrifice. Freedom seeped into the corners of my days. I joined a book club at a local cafe, where conversations spilled past the pages into laughter and stories I'd never dared to share before. Colleagues I had drifted from during the long years of responsibility reappeared, and I allowed myself dinners, late-night walks, and the simple joy of belonging without judgment. What struck me most was the quiet, not the suffocating silence of my father's house, heavy with expectation, but a peace that felt earned. No one barged into my space demanding explanations. No one dismissed my work as meaningless. Each morning, I brewed coffee and opened my laptop in the sunlit kitchen, answering to no one but myself. For the first time, I wasn't just the daughter who carried the family's burdens. I was a Lara reader, professional, friend, woman without apology. And while I was learning how to breathe again, the phone began to ring, carrying the familiar number I had once answered without hesitation. The first time I answered, His voice was already breaking. Roderick didn't bother with pleasantries, just launched into a torrent of complaints. The roof was leaking again. The utility bills were piling up, and Malcolm, after weeks of promises, still hadn't found a job. The house I had held together for years was unraveling without my hands to patch its cracks. "You need to come back," he barked, the authority in his tone worn thin but still clinging to its old shape. "Out of respect for this family, you need to step up. This is your responsibility." I sat in silence, the weight of his words sliding off me like rain against glass. My mind replayed every moment I had been dismissed, every sacrifice belittled as nothing more than duty. When he paused, waiting for my agreement, I let the quiet stretch. Then I said, evenly, "It's not my problem." The line went dead silent, and I knew he hadn't expected defiance. I could almost picture the red flush rising across his face. Somewhere behind him, I heard Malcolm's muffled voice, raised in argument. Roderick snapped back, and within seconds, the two of them were shouting over one another. Malcolm accused him of lying, of failing to prepare. Roderick accused Malcolm of wasting his life, of being nothing but a drain. The unity they had once wielded against me had splintered, turned inward, jagged and bitter. Their fortress of entitlement was collapsing from within, and for the first time, I felt no urge to rescue it. When the call ended, I set the phone down, the echo of their fighting fading into nothing, and turned back to the quiet of my own life, where peace waited patiently for me to claim it. The condo had become more than a place to live. It was proof that I could exist outside the shadow of obligation. Each morning, I woke without the heaviness of someone else's demands pressing against my chest. I worked, I read, I laughed, and the silence that once suffocated me had transformed into something gentle, something chosen. One Sunday, I drove to the cemetery, the air cool and still. My mother's name was etched into the headstone, worn from years of weather, but the sight of it never failed to steady me. I knelt, brushing away leaves, and let the words I had carried for so long finally find their place. I kept the house standing as long as I could, for you. But I know now, love isn't proven by sacrifice alone. Dignity matters too, and that will be my legacy. I stayed there for a while, letting the quiet settle, imagining her smile if she could see the woman I had become, not bowed, not silenced, but unafraid to walk away. Back in the city, life moved forward. Neighbors waved, friends called, and I discovered new routines that belonged entirely to me. Roderick and Malcolm, I heard, remained in the crumbling house of their own making, arguing, blaming, sinking under the weight of entitlement they could no longer sustain. I did not resent them anymore. I simply let them go. The chains they had fastened to me had dissolved, and in their place was something stronger than walls or deeds. A house paid in full means nothing if respect is still owed. I paid for both, and only one remains mine. The first thing I heard was bass rattling through the night air. Music so loud it shook the glass panes of my lake house. My lake house. The home I had fought for, saved for, dreamed of. I parked at the edge of the gravel driveway, confused, because I hadn't told a soul I was coming. Every window glowed. Shadows of people moved through the rooms as though they owned the place. I hurried to the front door, my hands trembling as I dug for my keys. The familiar silver teeth slid into the lock, but the cylinder wouldn't turn. It felt stuck, almost as if another key was already sitting inside from the other side. I knocked, once, then harder. Laughter spilled out between the cracks of the doorframe, laughter that didn't belong here. Finally, the door opened. Cirrus stood there, her makeup smudged and a glass dangling from her hand. She gave me that smile, the one that always felt more like a sneer. "What are you doing here?" she asked, her voice syrupy sweet, the kind she used when she wanted to cut deepest. behind her. I caught glimpses of uncles, cousins, people I hadn't invited in years, sprawled across my furniture with bottles in their hands. "This is my house," I managed, my throat tightening. Cirrus leaned against the frame, tilting her head with mock pity. "No room left. Maybe you should sleep in your car." And with that, she slammed the door in my face. I stood there for a long time, the night pressing heavy on my chest, the bass from inside thudding through my bones. My key dangled useless in my hand. My sanctuary, the place I had worked myself raw to buy, was no longer mine, not in that moment. I walked back to my car and sat behind the wheel, the glass fogging with each breath, the laughter from inside carried out into the night, and I realized something had broken, something I couldn't ignore anymore. It hadn't started tonight. It had been building for years, hidden beneath bills paid, favors granted, and silence I never should have kept. It hadn't always been this way. There was a time when every dollar I earned clung to me like a lifeline, stretched thin across rent, groceries, and the endless tide of student loans. I lived on packets of ramen, cut coupons until the paper smudged my fingers, and wore thrift shop clothes until the seams split. Nights blurred into mornings as I hunched over my computer, teaching myself new coding languages by lamplight, too tired to notice the ache in my wrists or the burn in my eyes. When I finally landed a stable position, the hours were merciless. 60-hour weeks, weekends spent debugging code no one else wanted to touch. But little by little, I clawed my way into something steadier. The first time I bought groceries without checking my balance 3 times, I cried in the parking lot, clutching bags of food like they were gold. My first apartment came soon after a modest 2-bedroom with thin walls and cracked tile. But it was mine. I could paint the kitchen yellow if I wanted to. I could invite friends without cringing at peeling paint or borrowed furniture. That tiny apartment became the first real taste of freedom. But it wasn't the end. The lake house came 3 years later, after months of pinching every spare dollar. I drove my car until it groaned at every stoplight, skipped vacations, and rotated the same 3 work outfits until the fabric thinned. The day I signed the papers, the agent looked surprised when I slid a check across the desk instead of loan documents. No mortgage, no debt, just pure, unburdened ownership. The house itself was simple 2 bedrooms, a broad deck that overlooked water so clear I could see stones on the bottom, and silence so deep it felt like a balm. Standing there the first time, I thought, this is what peace feels like. I hadn't asked for anyone's help to reach it. I hadn't leaned on anyone's shoulders. Yet, somehow, when my family looked at that house, they saw not sacrifice but spoils something they believed they had a right to share. I had always told myself that helping my family was what a good daughter did. At first. It was small $50 slipped into my mother's hand when the electric bill ran late. $100 to Orrin when his paycheck didn't stretch far enough. But small gestures grew into obligations, and before I realized it, nearly every month bled the same way. $800 went to Orrin for rent on his studio apartment. He never managed to hold a job long, but he always managed to hold out his hand. $1,100 went to Sarah so she could keep her 1 bedroom in the city. She said she needed the space to study for her certification exams, though years later the same books still sat untouched. $400 went to Mireille for groceries and utilities. I didn't even call it help anymore. It was just a line in my budget. As fixed as my own expenses, $2,300 disappeared every month into their lives. I told myself it was family loyalty. I told myself it was duty. And yet, each time I gave, the gratitude faded faster. Soon, it wasn't gratitude at all. When I showed up to dinner with a new bag of $45 purchase from a clearance rack, Cirrus eyed it like it was made of gold. "Must be nice," she muttered, loud enough for everyone to hear. Some of us are worrying about bills. Orrin wasn't any better. He once spotted a pair of shoes on my feet and whined about eating rice and beans, conveniently forgetting I had just covered his rent after he spent his last paycheck on concert tickets. Even my parents played their part. Gareth said little, but his silence felt like agreement. Mireille soothed the tension with her soft, cutting phrases. They just wish they had your opportunities. Elawin, opportunities as if luck, not years of sacrifice, had built my life. The weight of their resentment pressed heavier with every dinner, every sideways glance, every mocking comment. And though I swallowed it down, a part of me began to wonder just how far they thought my pockets could stretch. The first time I invited them to see the lake house, I was almost proud enough to forget how sour their words had been when I first told them about it. I wanted, foolishly, for them to share in my excitement. When they pulled up the drive, their faces lit, but not with joy for me. Cirrus walked straight inside and tossed her bag onto the guest bed like she was checking into a hotel. "This one's mine," she announced, her voice edged with triumph. Mireille wandered through the kitchen, touching the countertops, humming about how peaceful it all felt, when she asked for a spare key just in case. I hesitated only a second before handing one over. It seemed harmless family sharing family's space. Gareth muttered something about how quiet it was, and Oren stretched out on the sofa like he already owned it. At first, things seemed fine. They would text when they wanted to come for the weekend, and I'd let them. When I returned after, the house looked mostly unchanged, an extra towel here, a few dishes in the sink, nothing I couldn't handle. I told myself this was what generosity looked like. But one weekend I drove up unannounced, hoping for solitude after weeks of grueling work. The moment I opened the door, my chest sank. Beer bottles lined the mantel. Pizza boxes stacked high on the counter. The air smelled of smoke and grease. My white couch bore a stain shaped like a careless handprint, and cigarette burns scarred the deck furniture I had saved months to afford when I confronted them later. Cirrus shrugged, unconcerned. "So you can afford to fix it," Oren agreed, calling it normal wear and tear. Mireille only sighed, patting my arm. "Don't be so dramatic, Elowin." I demanded the key back that night, and Mireille pressed it into my palm with a wounded look, as if I had betrayed her. But as I walked away, clutching the metal tight, I couldn't shake the unease twisting in my stomach. Something told me that Key had already opened more doors than I ever intended. The night I found myself shut out of my own house, everything clicked into place. The lock refusing to turn, the music rattling the windows, the shadows of strangers moving across walls that had once been my refuge. It all pointed to one undeniable truth. They had copied the key. When the door cracked open, I saw more than my immediate family. Aunts I hadn't spoken to in years, cousins I barely recognized, people who had no right to be anywhere near my home, all of them lounged inside, drinks in hand, as if this place had always been theirs. My furniture was their seating, my deck their stage, my sanctuary their playground. I tried to push my way in, but Mireille stepped into the frame. Her face was calm, almost bored, as though this were nothing more than an awkward misunderstanding. "I made a copy before I gave yours back," she said lightly, like she was admitting to borrowing sugar from a neighbor, just in case, as though my property, my effort, my sacrifice were a communal resource waiting to be claimed whenever they felt the urge. Behind her, Cirrus appeared with that smirk I'd grown to despise. She held a glass in one hand and leaned her weight against the door with satisfaction gleaming in her eyes. "No room left," she said, her voice as sharp as broken glass. "You can sleep in your car." The door slammed, and I stood there in the dark, clutching the useless key in my fist until the edges bit into my palm. For a long moment, I couldn't move. My breath came shallow, my chest ached, and the laughter inside carried out into the night air like a cruel echo of everything I had already endured. I stumbled back to my car and sat behind the wheel, staring through the windshield at the house I no longer felt was mine. The weight of silence pressed down, hot tears stinging at the corners of my eyes. I thought of every bill paid, every rent check covered, Every moment I had traded peace for obligation, and as the music throbbed through the walls behind me, a bitter truth settled over me. My silence had never earned me respect. It had only taught them how far they could go, back in my apartment. The silence felt heavy, but it was mine. I dropped my bag on the counter and opened my laptop. For years, the transfers had run automatically lines of money leaving my account without my even thinking about it. Rent for Oren, rent for Saris, utilities for Mireille. I pulled up the scheduled payments, my hand hovering over the keys. Then, one by one, I canceled them. The confirmation screens blinked back at me. Transfer canceled. Automatic payment disabled. For the first time in years. My balance wouldn't drain into their pockets. My money, earned by sleepless nights and endless hours of code, would finally stay where it belonged with me. The next morning, I called the locksmith. By noon, the locks on the lake house were replaced with new cylinders. Every copy they had made rendered useless. The old keys clinked in a paper envelope as the locksmith handed them back. I thought of Mireille's calm voice saying, just in case, and shoved the envelope into the trash. But I wasn't done. I wanted to make sure there would never be a next time. A security company installed motion sensors, door alarms, cameras that covered every angle of the property. They walked me through the app, showing how each alert would go straight to my phone, watching the live feed of my empty deck. The stillness of my living room. I felt a strange calm return to me. That night, I returned to my apartment, heated a frozen meal, and sat in the dim light of my kitchen. The tears came without warning. My body shook as I gripped the counter, years of exhaustion and disappointment pouring out in sobs that I couldn't hold back anymore. I buried my face in my hands, whispering to no one but myself. No more. The words felt like a promise, even if they were thin and shaky. I wiped my eyes, steadied my breath, and looked again at the security feed glowing from my phone. For the first time, the silence didn't feel like loneliness. It felt like a beginning, and as I watched the stillness of my lake house on the screen, I had no idea how quickly that promise would be tested. The alert came just past midnight, the sharp buzz of my phone pulling me out of restless sleep. My heart raced as I opened the app. And there it was, my lake house glowing under the pale wash of the motion lights. Figures moved in the yard, 4 of them. I tapped to zoom, my breath catching. Gareth, Mireille, Oren, and Saris, my own family, pacing around the house like burglars. Mireille stood by the front door, her arms crossed. While Saris tugged at the knob, Gareth circled the windows, peering inside as though the home were some vacant prize. Oren picked up one of my patio chairs, his face twisted in frustration. In an instant, he raised it high and drove it against the sliding glass door. The crack of shattering glass echoed through the speakers of my phone. I felt sick, staring at the jagged hole they had forced into the home I had bled myself dry to earn. My thumb hovered only a moment before I pressed the call button. The dispatcher's voice was steady, calm, a lifeline. 911, what's your emergency? There are intruders in my house, I said, my voice shaking. I'm watching them on my cameras right now. It's my family. They're breaking in. She asked for the address, reassured me that units were on their way. I stayed on the line, eyes fixed on the feed as Oren stepped through the broken glass, unlocking the front door from inside. In seconds, all of them flooded in, spreading through my home as if nothing were wrong. Then the red and blue lights cut across the driveway. Officers stormed the porch, weapons at the ready, commands rang out, sharp and undeniable. My family stumbled back into the yard, their hands raised, confusion etched across their faces. One by one, they were cuffed, led to the cruisers, their heads lowered against the flashing lights. I watched it all unfold on the small screen in my hand, my pulse steadying, even as numbness settled deep in my chest. Relief and dread tangled together. leaving me with only one thought: would this be the moment that finally set me free, or the choice that destroyed us forever? The next morning, I walked into the station with my shoulders squared, though inside I was shaking. An officer led me down a narrow hallway and into a small room. The air smelled of coffee gone stale, papers stacked high on the desk. A detective told me my family wanted to speak with me before their release. When the door opened, they filed in, looking nothing like the triumphant crowd I had seen at my house. Mireille's hair was matted, her eyes swollen from crying. Gareth's jaw was tight, his face red with fury he was trying and failing to mask. Oren looked stunned, almost childlike, and Saris's mascara streaked black lines down her cheeks. Eloin. Thank God! Mireille rushed forward, reaching for my hand. I stepped back before she could touch me. "This is a mistake," Saris cried. "You can't just let them keep us here. We're family." "You abandoned me the night you locked me out of my own house," I said, my voice steady, sharper than I'd ever heard it. "You made your choice long before I made mine." Oren leaned across the table, desperation in his eyes. "Just post bail. We'll talk at home. We can fix this. I'm not paying a cent," I answered. "And you should know, the money's gone. Every rent check, every transfer, every dollar I sent you, it's over. You'll have to figure it out yourselves." The silence that followed was suffocating. Gareth's mouth opened as if to speak, but nothing came. Mireille's face drained of color, and Saris's tears stopped as quickly as they had come. The realization hit them all at once. The bank they had drained for years was finally closed. I stood, pushing the chair back gently. My decision final. Their eyes followed me as I turned to the door, their voices caught somewhere between anger and disbelief. I didn't look back as I stepped into the hallway, but I could feel the weight of their silence pressing against my shoulders, heavier than any chains. News traveled fast, even without me speaking a word. Within weeks, Oren and Saris were both evicted, their names plastered on late notices taped to apartment doors, with no rent payments arriving from me. They had nowhere else to go but back to Mireille and Gareth's cramped house. Suddenly, the ones who had mocked my independence were forced to share a childhood bedroom again. Mireille, who once carried herself with an air of practiced authority, started working part-time at a grocery store. Gareth, already worn from years of maintenance shifts, picked up overtime wherever he could. They had lived for so long with the cushion of my money that reality came down on them like a weight they couldn't push off. Through cousins and neighbors, I heard the stories how they told anyone who would listen that I was cruel, that I had turned my back on family, at barbecues and in grocery aisles. The gossip painted me as selfish, cold, ungrateful for the people who raised me. In their version, I was the villain who chose money over blood. My phone lit up constantly with their numbers, then with numbers of relatives I barely knew. I blocked them all. The silence afterward felt startling, like a door shutting on years of noise I hadn't realized was suffocating me. For the first time, my paycheck stayed in my account. I paid my bills and still had money left. Real money that was mine alone. I walked through stores without calculating what I could spare for someone else. I sat on my couch at night, breathing air that belonged only to me. And yet, in that silence, I wondered, was my freedom worth being branded the villain in their story? I returned to the lake house after weeks of keeping away, unsure if the silence would comfort me or remind me of what I'd lost. When I stepped inside, the locks clicked solidly behind me, the security system blinking steady at the door. For the first time, the house felt entirely mine again, untouched, unspoiled, safe. The morning sun stretched across the deck, spilling gold over the water. I carried my coffee outside and sat in the quiet, the kind of quiet that wasn't absence but presence, every ripple of the lake, every breath of wind through the trees reminding me that peace could exist without compromise. I thought about loyalty, the way it had been twisted into something ugly. They called it family love. But what kind of love demanded sacrifice without respect? What kind of love locked me out of my own home and told me to sleep in my car? I had given them years of myself. And in the end, they treated me like a resource, not a daughter or a sister. I breathed deeply, letting the stillness of the lake settle into me. For the first time in years, I felt the weight lift, not because I had punished them, but because I had finally chosen myself. I whispered the words into the morning air, firm and unshaken. My house, my life, my rules. In the end, what lasts longer, the house we build or the dignity we refuse to sell? Outline, full story outline. They copied my keys, then slammed the door in my face characters.